record button. All right, well, happy Wednesday, everyone. You're joining the Innovate BC webinar this afternoon. I'm Michelle. I am joining from Amiskwaci, Waskahigan, Edmonton, Treaty 6 territory. The sun is shining, but let's not be deceived by that sun. It is super chilly out there. So we're still in our winter season, but it's 2 weeks away from spring season. I, for one, am ready for a new season. So welcome. We're honored and happy that you've joined us this afternoon. Before we get started, we always like to take a moment, press pause, and give thanks to Creator for the gifts of all that is around us, gifts of land, gifts of sacred waters, the animals, the plants, our families, our friends, all our relations. We give thanks for these gifts. And you know, when the sun rises in the east, that's Creator meeting us for a new day. So here we are in this new day. Well, we're kind of midway through this day, but here we are having an opportunity to come together as a virtual community, a virtual family, just to take in some knowledge. So today's knowledge is about CleanBC, so energy. So we have a guest speaker. Jesse is with us today. We are honored that he is here, and he's going to lead us in a good discussion. He's going to tell us what's happening. So really, the discussion is an introduction to CleanBC's roadmap to 2030. So it's a CleanBC initiative. So he will provide a summary of the provincial climate plan, including an update on implementation. Current engagement focuses on the provincial carbon pricing review, exploring Indigenous capacity and expertise to develop the circular economy, and to discuss the types of Indigenous engagement that are most effective. So it looks to be like a really rich conversation today. He did say that there was a lot of information to take in. So I always say this: take what you need, hear what you need. I also write notes as well along the way. That helps me to learn in a good way. So find those practices that help you to learn in a good way this afternoon. So a couple of things about CleanBC's roadmap to 2030 background. The province is taking the next big step on our CleanBC plan and introducing new measures so that we can meet our emissions reduction targets for 2030. I love that. And reach net zero by 2050. The CleanBC Roadmap to 2030 is the province's plan to achieve 100% of our 2030 emissions target while building a cleaner economy that benefits everyone. So it includes a range of accelerated and expanded actions across 8 pathways. And I trust that Jesse's going to go into those 8 pathways throughout his presentation. So a little bit about our guest speaker, just a little bit. He is a senior policy analyst at the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy, where he works to advance climate action. Over the last decade, he has worked on environmental issues in Africa, the Middle East, and British Columbia. So thank you so much for Jesse for being here, lending your valuable time and knowledge to this topic, and just informing us this afternoon. So I'm going to pass this virtual mic off to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Michelle, for that introduction. And hello, everyone. My name is Jesse. Today, I'm calling in from the traditional territories of the Tongan-speaking people. It's a real honor to be on these lands. I call this place my home, and I'm just so fortunate to be here. I'm so fortunate to join everyone on the call today from what sounds like different spots all across Canada, which is really fantastic. And I think anyways that there's a lot of interesting things going on in the climate sphere here in British Columbia. And Michelle referenced the roadmap to 2030 was recently released. So I'll get into a bit of that. I'll unpack kind of what's in the roadmap, look at those different pathways, talk about some of the work that went into developing the roadmap. I'll do a bit of a light touch on the topics of our current engagement session, but also with information about how to join an upcoming session where we'll really break or dig into some of the topics that I'll discuss today in those engagement sessions. I just want to take a note too to say that there's a lot of information in the deck that I'll present, and so we're going to have the deck. We'll make it available for participants after the presentation, and so I'll make sure I'll work with my colleagues Katie and Avril, who are on the line as well, to help answer any questions or provide any further information. But we'll work to make sure that we have this available as a resource. Yeah, and then looking forward to discussion afterwards. So I'm going to show my screen. I'm going to turn my video off, but then once the presentation is done, I'll turn it back on. We can have a discussion, and I can commit to, if I don't know the answer to any of your questions, and my colleagues Katie and Avril, if we don't have the answer, we're happy to follow up, find the answer, or put you in contact with the individual, our partners in government who might have that information, just recognizing that this is a whole of government plan, and a lot of the responsibilities for the individual policies sit in other ministry or in other ministries. So that's my commitment to you, and I'm just going to do a bit of punching in which screen I'm going to able to share. Let's see if that works. I might get a thumbs up from Michelle to make sure. Can you see the presentation? Awesome. Okay, so let's see here. I'm going to stop my video. I'm going to minimize. And okay. As expected, some slight technological things on my side here, but not to worry, I am figuring it out. All right, Michelle, hands up that you can see. Okay, awesome. So let's see here. As we mentioned at the beginning, roadmap to 2030 or 2030. What is it? What it's all about? That's what I'm here to talk to you about today. So the original plan, like we'd mentioned, called CleanBC, was first launched in December 2018. And in CleanBC, there's about 40 initiatives that are designed to reduce our emission reduction or our GHG emissions across our economy. And CleanBC focused on 3 sectors specifically that have the largest share of emissions in BC right now. So it's transportation, buildings, and industry. And at the time that CleanBC was launched, the initiatives within the plan were projected to get us about 75% of the way to our 2030 climate target. And that target was reducing emissions 40% below 2007 levels. So 2007 is our baseline. 2030 target is reducing emissions 40% below those levels. But within CleanBC, the original plan in 2018, since we didn't kind of hit that 100% of meeting our 2030 targets, there was a commitment to come back, do further policy development, and put out a plan that could make sure that we fully achieve our 2030 target. So that's what the roadmap to 2030 is. It builds on the success of CleanBC, and it also creates a path to fully achieve our 2030 target. And so we've taken a roadmap approach, and essentially what we've done is we've outlined 8 key areas across BC's economy that either generate greenhouse gas emissions or are areas that could generate climate solutions to reduce our emissions or ideally avoid them altogether. So these 8 areas are called pathways. The next slide will look at the specific pathways. And the initiatives within the roadmap are grouped under these pathways. So these pathways kind of act as a basket of different initiatives that can help us get 100% to our 2030 target. Each of the pathways, when it was developed, was assessed to determine the maturity of existing solutions and climate policies within the pathway. So for instance, in pathways with clean options already available, and we can think of examples like heat pumps, electric vehicles, the pathway focuses on actions to scale up these solutions. So these are existing solutions, things we know that work, and the idea is to scale them up so they're more distributed, or they're taken up more broadly. In pathways where clean options are still emerging, and so an example of this is negative emission technologies. The technology exists, but it's at a kind of an earlier stage of maturity. The pathway actions focus on things like innovation, research and development, as ways to kind of build the capacity within those approaches or those technologies. So the 8 pathways that we look at, or that we have in the roadmap, are agriculture, aquaculture, and fisheries, forest bioeconomy, transportation, buildings, negative emission technologies, low carbon energy, communities, and industry, including oil and gas. And so if you look at the roadmap plan itself, these icons that you see on the screen here are directly from the document. And within the document, like, we recognize it's a big plan. It's cross-government and it's multi-sector. It's founded on and implemented with continuous feedback opportunities to make sure it remains responsive, and it builds on the progress since CleanBC, which we launched in 2018. And I think that piece is really important too, in terms of the continuous feedback. This is a plan. 2030 is in the near future. It's only 8 years away, but we recognize that there's still quite a few unknowns in terms of exactly what the policies and what the initiatives and programs will look like to make sure we get there. And so a lot of that work that government has to do involves that continuous feedback and making sure that the way that we're implementing the roadmap is responsive to people across the province and different interests. Within the roadmap, there's a few marquee measures, and these are the actions that drive the most greenhouse gas reductions while helping BC transition to a clean economy. So this is things like a stronger price on carbon pollution, an accelerated zero emission vehicle law for light duty, and new targets for medium and heavy duty vehicles. It's things like a new greenhouse gas cap for natural gas utilities, an enhanced program for industry, a few different things. Marquee measures were introduced in the roadmap, and they follow advice that we've received from our Climate Solutions Council, which includes representatives from academia, business, industry, Indigenous peoples, local governments, labor, youth, and environmental groups. And the input that we've received from the Climate Solutions Council has been informed by experience and from the advice that the council, and the advice from the council is a result of lively and informed debate that we're able to find a consensus perspective on. And just a quick note on the council. The council is an external advisory body, external to government advisory body that provides this climate advice on both mitigation and adaptation initiatives. So the next several slides are going to delve into roadmap policies outlined in each of the 8 pathways. And some of them are going to include those marquee measures that I just spoke to. So I'm not going to touch on all the examples and all the bullets on each slide, because there's a lot there. And like I mentioned, the deck will be made available afterwards, and all this information is in the roadmap report itself. But I'll just touch on a few to kind of illustrate what's included in the pathways. So the first one, low carbon energy. We know that fossil fuels are a major source of emissions in BC. The roadmap proposes several measures to clean up our energy system, including increasing the renewable content in the gasoline and the diesel in our vehicles and reducing the carbon intensity of natural gas that heats our homes and businesses. The province has committed to implementing 100% clean electricity delivery standard for BC Hydro, which is our one of our hydroelectricity providers, to increase the benefit of further electrification and support BC Hydro in phasing out remaining gas-fired facilities on its grid by 2030. And in BC, we have a real comparative advantage in clean energy. And so we want to leverage that advantage by also implementing the BC hydrogen strategy. And this strategy was released, I believe, in the summer of 2021. Katie and Avril might be able to confirm that, but yeah, so there's an opportunity to really leverage that clean energy grid that we have or clean electricity grid we have in BC. And we're also going to capitalize on areas that we've seen great strides in since the launch of CleanBC. And specifically, that's to double the target for made in BC renewable fuels to 1.3 billion liters by 2030. And so that's building on the CleanBC target, which was 650 million liters of renewable fuels per year. So this has been extremely successful. The roadmap, we've doubled that target. The second pathway I'll speak to is transportation. And transportation is the area most people think about when considering their own carbon footprint. And it's also the largest amount of our emissions in BC. So the roadmap will accelerate BC's target for zero emission new light duty vehicle sales. So our targets are by 2030, 90% of all new light duty vehicles sold will be zero emissions. And then by 2035, that will be 100%. That's a full 5 years ahead of what our initial CleanBC target was. The province will also adjust its incentive programs to ensure that we're providing support to those who need it the most, while also making clean solutions accessible to more people. And in partnership with industry and other key partners, the province will work to make commercial transportation systems more competitive while accelerating innovation and driving the adoption of clean BC-made technologies. So the next two pathways, so buildings and then communities, separate pathways, but I'll speak to them in this on this slide. The roadmap proposes several measures to reduce emissions across these two sectors of these two pathways. So BC will bring carbon pollution standards into the BC Building Code, which will create consistency across the province. The incentives that are currently offered for fossil fuel furnaces and fossil fuel hot water tanks will be discontinued. And the idea here is to stop encouraging the purchase of new fossil fuel-based equipment that essentially will be locked in for many years once they're installed. We will develop guidance and building sector capacity for climate resilient building design. And there'll be a suite of measures to support communities, including a new program for local governments to support their capacity to tackle climate change. The next pathway is industry, including oil and gas. And we know that reducing emissions from the industrial sector is critical, but it can also come with enormous economic benefits. On industry generally, BC will look to virtually eliminate methane emissions by 2035. And at the same time, we will develop a provincial approach to carbon capture and storage, require companies to show plans for how they will reach net zero by 2050, and enhance the industrial climate program. And this is to further support emission reductions and economic competitiveness for the industry sector. And this last part is critical so that BC can maintain and strengthen its resource economy, which in several sectors is ideally positioned to provide the resources a global low carbon economy needs. And the oil and gas sector is a major source of emissions in BC. And so to help address this, the roadmap includes reducing emissions from this sector and requiring a 75% reduction in methane emissions by 2030. And the final section of the roadmap relates to carbon sequestration. BC's forests and ecosystems can play a major role in our fight against climate change. So the province will look to plant more trees and finalize the forest carbon offset protocol. The province will also seek to nearly eliminate forest slash pile burning by 2030, while supporting greenhouse gas efficient practices in agriculture, aquaculture, and fisheries sector. And we will facilitate the development of new negative emission technologies. The international community is increasingly seeing a credible and vital role for technologies that remove carbon from the air, and BC can play what we think is an outsized role in this emerging sector. So this slide shows how BC's targets will be met. The top black line here, that shows our kind of previous or past emission levels. The blue bar at the top here, the thin line, is our business as usual without CleanBC phase 1 action. So what our emissions would be like if we hadn't released CleanBC in 2018. The second shaded area, just right here, kind of in the middle, it shows the reductions expected from our CleanBC phase 1 actions. So with those actions that we released in 2018, what are our emission reductions going to look like? And so it's that wedge there. And then this last shaded area shows the reductions expected from the CleanBC Roadmap with the ultimate target of hitting our 2030 emission reduction targets. This is also a good opportunity to reemphasize the importance of our CleanBC accountability provisions. And so we have a commitment in law in our Climate Change Accountability Act to table an annual accountability report. And this report sets out the measures that we're taking, the progress that we're having, and then our future planned actions towards reaching our emission reduction targets and actions to reduce our emission reduction targets, and then as well actions we're taking to adapt to a changing climate. So it has both a mitigation and an adaptation reporting requirement. And climate action requires constant attention. It requires robust feedback loops to monitor, measure, and adjust to changing conditions. And often these changing conditions are outside of our direct control. And it also includes continued collaboration with key partners, Indigenous governments, sectors, and communities. And together, this is just extremely important to bend the emissions curve towards reaching our targets. The next two slides are equally as dense with material, but essentially these are screen grabs from the actual Roadmap to 2030 report, and it shows the various initiatives under each of the pathways and the estimated emission reduction target emission reductions that will result from those actions. So this is towards the end of the Roadmap to 2030 report. But what it shows is that together, the emission reduction targets, or the emission reductions that we'll see in the Roadmap to 2030 will allow us to reach our 2030 target. The province has done comprehensive engagement with Indigenous peoples during the development of the Roadmap to 2030. In the summer of 2021, so last summer, we held multiple full-day sessions directly with communities. The examples of what we heard are, some of them are here on this slide, And the roadmap document itself includes a section that mentions how Indigenous feedback has directly impacted the choices we've made in the development of the roadmap. So there's a few examples. So we heard that Indigenous people expressed the need for greater affordability and accessibility of CleanBC programs. And this led to the commitment to have a single window access for all CleanBC related incentives and programs, and a renewed focus on affordability and program design. It emphasized public climate education as key to support community decision-making, understanding priorities, and the importance of climate action. And so when we heard that, and that was clearly expressed during our engagements last summer, the roadmap has a commitment to implement public awareness and education campaigns with a dedicated strategy to connect with youth. And we also heard during our engagement sessions last summer that Indigenous people expressed a desire for skills training to ensure participation in clean growth opportunities. And as a declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act action plan, so this is an action plan that the province is developing right now, as it's implemented and as the roadmap policies that I've just spoken to today are rolled out, there are opportunities to build stronger partnerships with Indigenous peoples, improve how decision-making is shared, and better incorporate Indigenous perspectives and interests into provincial climate mitigation and adaptation plans and policies. And so just kind of at a very high level, this slide shows the engagement that we've done to date in 2022, and also what we have planned for April and then moving forward. And this engagement builds on the engagement we did in 2021. So in February, we hosted a climate resilience forum. We've had workshops on the CleanBC Communities Fund, as well as the Community Climate Funding Guide. And we've done engagement on the low carbon fuel standard. Right now in March, we're currently engaging on roadmap implementation, circular economy, and carbon pricing. And so I'll just speak to those three briefly in the next slide. And then we're going to continue our engagement on carbon pricing in April. And we're going to continue our engagement to support roadmap implementation moving forward. And there's a number of policies and programs in the roadmap that are going to be the focus of engagement sessions as we develop the details, as we develop those in further detail. So some of that, or some of those topics include the increased ZEV targets, so the zero emission vehicle targets I'd mentioned, implementing energy intensity targets and policies for the movement of goods, and the renewable energy from remote community strategy. So I'd mentioned that there's an opportunity next week to take part in our current engagement sessions. And so that's a focus on roadmap implementation, the carbon pricing review, and circular economy. So we have, our next session is March 14th. There's one at 9:30 a.m. in the BC time, and then 1 o'clock p.m. as well. And so we'll be able to circulate information on the registration link and how to take part in these conversations for anyone on the line who's interested. And also, if you have colleagues or contacts who you think would also be interested, we'd welcome you sharing the information with them as well. But just to give a bit of a sneak peek on those, our current engagement sessions and on the topics. So our first topic is on the implementation of the roadmap. And so during these sessions, we're hoping to hear from Indigenous businesses, elders, leaders, community members and youth directly to help shape future engagement opportunities and to identify priorities and areas of interest in the near term and ongoing as the roadmap is implemented. Like I'd mentioned, the roadmap implementation is a multi-year process, and we're building out an engagement strategy that will provide kind of the direction for engagement moving forward. We also want to learn how we can better support capacity and expertise, Indigenous-led initiatives, and self-determination. So the information we gather will inform engagement planning for this year and beyond. And these sessions could also gather perspectives to inform a climate change education and awareness campaign. And this education and awareness campaign is currently being developed. And as the roadmap rolls out, we'll seize the opportunity to build stronger partnerships with Indigenous peoples by ensuring meaningful participation in decision-making and in the low carbon economy. The second topic is the carbon price review. So BC has used a carbon tax to combat climate change since 2008. BC's current carbon tax is set at $45 per ton. This is equivalent to around 10 cents extra on a liter of gasoline at the pump. And it's an added expense, but it is intended to drive down demand, which in turn can reduce our carbon emissions. So the federal government has set a minimum carbon price for all provinces and territories in Canada. BC is committed to meet or exceed the federal carbon price in the roadmap to 2030. It will rise by $15 per ton each year until reaching $170 per ton in 2030. And BC, well, here at the province, we expect changes to the carbon tax will be made in 2023 to meet the federal requirements. So throughout this year, throughout 2022, we're conducting a review of BC's current carbon pricing system to decide which changes need to be made when the carbon price increases. And then the third area is the development of a circular economy strategy. And this is being initiated in order to take a more holistic approach to create less waste, reduce our emissions, and support our economy. So in a circular economy, we can reduce waste by limiting the number of items we use. We can stop using materials that are difficult to reuse or recycle. And we're able to keep using the materials or the items that we have for longer. So just at a very high level, those are the three topics that our engagement sessions next week are focused on. And as well, like I mentioned, there's going to be lots of opportunities as additional roadmap initiatives are being developed to engage and to co-create what these look like. So I'll end it there. Happy to take questions, and yeah, looking forward to having a conversation, and I'm going to turn my video back on.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Jesse, for your informative presentation. You laid out some really great understanding. You shared some of the strategy. As an Indigenous person, I, for one, am really hopeful that there's been good dialogue and a priority around the Indigenous voice. So thank you so much for your presentation. And thank you for the folks who dropped some links in the chat box. If you didn't see that, make sure you make note of those. And also there's that link for next week's meeting that if this is something of interest for you, you could go ahead and register for that. All right. Any questions out there or comments? The floor is open. You can unmute yourself, put it in the chat box. We would love to hear from you. I feel like you gave us a lot to think about.
It was a fire hose of information, and And like I said, yeah, we'll circulate the presentation after, and I'd invite my colleagues, Avril or Katie, if there's anything that you wanted to correct the record on, if I got that slightly wrong, or anything to add, yeah, please do. But welcome any questions, any comments. Yeah, we're happy to be here and happy to have these conversations.
Yeah, and happy to come back too if there's a certain area that you feel that might be of particular interest to explore around economic development and the roadmap. Our team is always happy to come back and talk maybe a little deeper on some of the policies that Jesse's run through today, but just really appreciate everybody's time and hope you'll join us next week if you're able. And if not, we're always here to talk about the roadmap or answer questions.
Yeah, I think the roadmap is pretty innovative, doing some pretty amazing work. Climate action is really important. I know for myself, I have 2 young kids, so the future and their future is really important. So I really like dedicating my time and my work to this. I can drop my email in the chat. So if there's participants here that maybe don't have questions yet, but maybe something comes up after, you can feel free to reach out to me. Definitely don't know everything, but I know a lot of people, so I can try and connect you with the right person. But yeah, thanks for your time, everyone, and happy to discuss.
Awesome. All right. So we have 3 team members here. So we got some really good knowledge, some really good expertise, may I say that, in the room, in the virtual room this afternoon. So this is an excellent time for any questions that you may have. And as Jesse said a couple of times, like, this will be sent to you so that you could look over it. You can read it again because there was a lot of really, really good information. So in the chat box, there is email address, so make note of that. But it seems to me that there's no questions at the moment. I mean, it's very ambitious. It's very hopeful. So thank you for spending some time with us this afternoon and sharing the plan, sharing the strategy. So thank you so much. Hopefully we can connect in the future. Thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon with Innovate BC. It's very hopeful. You know, as you said, Katie, you know, we think about the kids, we think about their futures and not just ours. So this is very great to hear what is going on in your end of the nation in BC. So awesome. So, okay, well, that's a wrap. So thank you all for joining. You know, take some time, you know, to spend on the land, to spend with one of, I say, Creator's best gifts to us is this beautiful land, beautiful Mother Earth. Again, the sacred waters, the plants, the animals, all of this beautiful creation, this land that has been given to us. And we want to make sure that we take care of it and we're good stewards of this gift that has been given to us. So take some time outdoors, perhaps take in that good fresh air and always walk in gratitude. So thank you for joining us this afternoon and be well.
Thanks so much, everyone.